The morning light filtered through the first-class cabin as Maya Roberts settled into seat 2A, her simple carry-on stowed neatly overhead. To the crew of Flight 237, she was just another black woman who didn't fit their image of a premium passenger. But as veteran stewardess Clara Monroe served champagne to white executives while offering Maya only water, she had no idea she was making the biggest mistake of her 18-year career. The subtle sneers, the moldy meal, the whispered insults. Clara thought she was dealing with someone who would suffer in silence like countless passengers before. What Clara couldn't see was the worn leather notebook where Maya methodically documented every violation, or the federal badge hidden in her pocket. They had unknowingly antagonized an undercover FAA inspector with the power to ground not just a flight attendant, but an entire airline. And as the plane climbed to 35,000 feet, the stage was set for a reckoning that would change the skies forever. Just before we get back to it, I'd love to know where you're watching from today, and if you're enjoying these stories, make sure you're subscribed. The sun hadn't yet crested the Manhattan skyline when the crew of Flight 237 from New York to San Francisco assembled for their pre-flight briefing. The cabin sparkled with fresh polish, and the early morning light cast long shadows through the first-class cabin's oversized windows. "Listen up, everyone," said Diane Harper, the lead purser, her voice crisp and authoritative. "Today's flight is routine but VIP heavy. We've got a tech CEO, a character actor from that new streaming show, a senator's aide, and the Millers, they're platinum members who fly with us monthly." She flipped through her clipboard. "Let's give them our absolute best service today." Clara Monroe nodded, smoothing her perfectly pressed Navy uniform. At 43, she was the most experienced flight attendant on the crew, having served the airline's elite passengers for 18 years. She took pride in knowing exactly how each first-class passenger liked their coffee, which ones preferred to be left alone, and which ones enjoyed a chat about their vacation plans. "I'll handle first class," Clara said with practiced confidence. "Jamie can assist." She glanced at the newest crew member, a fresh-faced girl barely out of training who looked nervous but eager. As the early boarding began, Clara positioned herself at the aircraft door, her smile bright and rehearsed. "Good morning. Welcome aboard." She greeted each first-class passenger with the same practiced warmth. Thomas Ward, the tech CEO, brushed past with barely a nod, already on his phone arguing about stock options. The elderly Millers followed, Harold supporting his wife Ellen's elbow as they made their way to seats 1A and 1B. The actor, Bradley Thompson, sauntered in wearing sunglasses despite the early hour, and the senator's aide, a thin man named Paul Garrett, carried a briefcase that looked handcuffed to his wrist. Clara's mental checklist was nearly complete when an unexpected passenger appeared at the door. A young black woman, perhaps in her early 20s, approached with a simple carry-on. She wore a conservative navy blazer over a white blouse and plain black slacks, professional but not flashy. Her natural hair was pulled back neatly, and she carried herself with quiet confidence. "Good morning," the young woman said, her voice soft but clear. "Seat 2A, please." Clara's smile faltered for just a second. She glanced down at the digital boarding pass on the girl's phone, confirming the seat assignment. "First class." Clara's eyes narrowed slightly. "Of course," she said, her tone shifting almost imperceptibly. "Down to your right." The girl nodded politely and made her way to her seat, not asking for help with her small carry-on, which she stowed efficiently before settling into 2A. Clara watched her from the corner of her eye, exchanging a meaningful glance with Jamie. "Must be an upgrade," Clara whispered as Jamie passed. "Or someone's assistant." As the boarding continued, Clara made her way through the first-class cabin offering pre-flight drinks. "Orange juice or champagne, Mr. Ward?" she asked the CEO, who grunted and pointed to champagne without looking up from his phone. "Mrs. Miller, Mr. Miller, your usual mimosas," Clara asked, already pouring. "You're an angel, Clara," Harold Miller said with a warm smile. When Clara reached the young black woman, her demeanor shifted. "Water?" she asked flatly, not offering options. The young woman looked up from settling into her seat. "What are the available options?" Clara's lips tightened. "I'll let you know when we start service," she said curtly, moving on without serving anything. The young woman's expression remained neutral as she pulled out a worn leather notebook from her bag. She opened it to a fresh page, noting the time and date at the top, then began to write in a small, precise hand. As she wrote, her eyes moved around the cabin, observing details that others might miss. A seatbelt that hadn't been properly cleaned, a tray table latch that didn't click fully into place. In the aisle, Clara leaned close to Jamie. "She's probably someone's assistant or nanny," she muttered. "They let anyone in first class these days." Jamie's eyes widened slightly, but she said nothing, continuing her preparations. Captain Lee emerged briefly from the cockpit, scanning the cabin as was, his habit before takeoff. His gaze lingered momentarily on the young woman in 2A, and he raised an eyebrow before returning to the flight deck. The young woman noticed his glance and made another note in her book. Ellen Miller, seated across the aisle, leaned over slightly. "Is everything all right, dear?" she asked kindly. "First time flying first class?" The young woman smiled, warm but measured. "I'm just here to observe," she said simply. Ellen nodded, though clearly confused by the cryptic response. She glanced at Clara, who was busy fussing over Bradley Thompson's specific requests for his in-flight meal. "Make sure it's medium rare, not medium," the actor was saying, "and the dressing on the side, not on the salad." "Of course, Mr. Thompson," Clara assured him. "We have your preferences noted." As the final boarding announcements were made and the doors secured, the atmosphere in the first-class cabin settled into the quiet hum of privilege. The young woman continued writing in her notebook, occasionally glancing at her watch as though timing something. The flight took off smoothly, climbing through wispy morning clouds into the brilliant blue sky above New York. Once they reached cruising altitude, Clara began meal preparations, moving with practiced efficiency. Jamie assisted, laying out fine china and real silverware for each passenger. When the meal service began, Clara handed out covered trays with flourish. "Mr. Ward, your requested protein plate," she announced. "Mr. and Mrs. Miller, your vegetarian options." Each passenger received a steaming gourmet meal with garnishes and fresh bread. When Clara reached the young woman in 2A, her demeanor changed. She placed a covered tray down with a perfunctory "here." The tray looked identical to the others from the outside, but when the young woman lifted the cover, she found stark differences. Instead of the gourmet meal the other passengers received, her tray contained a single piece of bread that looked stale around the edges, a bruised apple, and a small cup of room-temperature water. No protein, no vegetables, no garnish. The young woman looked at the meal silently, then glanced up at Clara, who had already turned away to fawn over Thomas Ward's needs. "Excuse me," Ward called out, his voice sharp with entitlement. "This steak is medium, not medium rare as I requested." "I'm so terribly sorry, Mr. Ward," Clara rushed to his side. "Let me take that back immediately and get you a proper replacement." The young woman didn't raise her voice or make a scene. Instead, she discreetly examined the bread, noting the small spots of mold on its underside. She sniffed it gently, then placed it back on the tray and took out her notebook again. With methodical precision, she recorded the time, a description of the meal, and several other observations. Paul Garrett, the senator's aide seated across from her, glanced over with undisguised curiosity. Their eyes met briefly, and he quickly looked away, suddenly interested in his own meal. Jamie, moving through the cabin with water refills, passed by and noticed the young woman's tray. Her eyes widened slightly, but she said nothing, continuing her duties with a troubled expression. Bradley Thompson, the actor, was the only one who seemed openly bothered by what he'd seen. He leaned across the aisle toward the young woman. "That doesn't look right," he said, gesturing toward her tray. "Mine's great, you should say something." The young woman simply nodded. "I'm noting everything," she said calmly. "Thank you for your concern." Thompson frowned, clearly not understanding her response, but returned to his own meal. The young woman continued writing in her notebook, now adding details about cabin temperature, staff names, and behavior patterns. Her handwriting remained steady and meticulous. The flight encountered light turbulence, causing a ripple of tension through the cabin. While other passengers gripped their armrests or quickly secured their drinks, the young woman calmly adjusted, her position She reached for her seatbelt, testing the mechanism. It didn't click properly, failing to tighten when pulled. She made another note. The co-pilot emerged from the cockpit, making his way toward the lavatory. He was young, perhaps in his late 20s, with alert eyes that swept the cabin professionally. As he passed the young woman, their eyes met briefly. He did a slight double-take, as though recognizing something about her. She responded with a subtle nod. Clara, returning with Ward's correctly cooked steak, noticed the exchange and frowned. As she passed the young woman's seat again, she snatched away the untouched tray without warning. "Don't expect room service up here," Clara muttered, just loud enough for those nearby to hear. "Thank you for your service," the young woman replied evenly. "I'm learning a lot." Clara interpreted the comment as sarcasm and rolled her eyes dramatically. As she walked away, leaning close to Jamie to whisper, "They let anyone in here these days." Jamie stiffened but remained silent, her discomfort evident. She glanced back at the young woman with an apologetic expression. As the meal service concluded, the young woman took out her phone and opened a secure app. She typed a brief message, her fingers moving quickly across the screen, then locked the device and returned it to her pocket. The message was time-stamped and secured, though its contents remained private. Ellen Miller, who had been watching discreetly from her seat, finally spoke up. She waved Clara over with a firm gesture. "Excuse me," the elderly woman said, her voice carrying unexpected authority. "That young lady's meal was completely unacceptable. I saw mold on that bread." Clara's smile tightened. "Mind your business, ma'am," she said in a low voice. "She's not a real passenger." Ellen recoiled slightly, shocked by the response. "I beg your pardon." But Clara had already moved on, busying herself with clearing the remaining trays and preparing for the next phase of the flight. The young woman caught Ellen's eye and gave her a small, reassuring smile. Then she returned to her observations, recording each interaction meticulously in her worn leather notebook. The midday sun streamed through the first-class windows as Flight 237 continued its journey westward. The young woman in Seat 2A remained composed despite the incident with the moldy meal. She took another small notebook from her bag, this one with a federal seal embossed on its cover, though she kept it angled away from curious eyes. When she opened the bread to examine it more closely, the distinct green-blue patches of mold were unmistakable. Instead of reacting with disgust or anger, she methodically documented the condition, even using her phone to discreetly photograph the evidence. Thomas Ward, the tech CEO in Seat 3A, continued to make his presence known. His voice carried through the cabin as he complained about his meal, now cold after the replacement. "The steak is perfect, but now the potatoes are cold," he announced loudly. "Is it really that difficult to get a properly prepared meal?" Clara rushed over immediately, her demeanor transforming into one of complete deference. "I'm so terribly sorry, Mr. Ward. Let me heat those for you right away." She whisked away his plate with practiced efficiency. Meanwhile, the young woman in 2A continued her quiet documentation. She noted cabin pressure readings from the small display near her seat, jotted down timestamps of service inconsistencies, and recorded the names of crew members from their badges. Her methodical approach suggested someone with training in observation and documentation. The cabin temperature fluctuated slightly, another detail she recorded. Most passengers wouldn't notice the 2-degree drop, but she made note of it, along with the time. When light turbulence shook the plane again, passengers reacted with varying degrees of alarm. Bradley Thompson gripped his armrests tightly, while the Millers held hands. The young woman remained perfectly calm, using the moment to test her faulty seatbelt again. She pressed the release button and pulled the strap. The mechanism failed to engage properly. Another note went into her book. The co-pilot, whose name badge read First Officer Andrew Bennett, made another trip from the cockpit. This time, his eyes lingered deliberately on the young woman. Their brief eye contact contained a message, recognition perhaps, or professional acknowledgement. He continued to the lavatory, but glanced back once more before returning to the flight deck. Clara noticed the exchange, and her irritation visibly grew. As she passed with Ward's reheated meal, She deliberately bumped the young woman's elbow, causing her pen to skid across the page. "Oops," Clara said insincerely. "Turbulence." The young woman didn't react to the provocation. She simply turned to a fresh page and continued her notes. An hour into the flight, Clara began collecting the remaining trays. When she reached the young woman, she snatched the untouched tray with unnecessary force. "Don't expect room service up here," Clara snapped, loud enough for nearby passengers to hear. "Some people just don't know their place." The young woman looked up, her expression calm but penetrating. "Thank you for your service," she said with measured precision. "I'm learning a lot about this airline's standards." Clara interpreted the comment as insolence and scoffed. "Whatever," she muttered before moving on. Jamie, the younger flight attendant who had been watching these interactions with increasing discomfort, approached the young woman when Clara moved to the galley. "Can I get you anything?" Jamie asked quietly. "Some water or maybe a snack from my personal bag?" "That's very kind," the young woman replied. "But I'm fine, thank you. You're doing your best." Jamie nodded, her eyes communicating an unspoken apology before she continued her duties. From her seat, Ellen Miller observed the ongoing situation with growing concern. She leaned across the aisle again. "That's simply unacceptable," she whispered. "Would you like me to speak to the purser?" The young woman shook her head slightly. "Please don't worry yourself, ma'am. Everything is being addressed." Ellen frowned, confused by the cryptic response, but respected the younger woman's wishes. The young woman opened a secure messaging app on her phone, typing a brief message with encrypted protocols visible at the top of the screen. The app required fingerprint authentication before sending, a level of security unusual for most passengers. The message disappeared with a confirmation that read, "Secure transmission complete." Mid-flight, Clara's treatment of the young woman continued to deteriorate. When serving mid-flight refreshments, she skipped seat 2A entirely. When the young woman pressed the call button to request water, Clara ignored it for 15 minutes, before Jamie finally responded. "I'm so sorry," Jamie whispered as she brought a bottle of water. "She told me not to answer your call button." The young woman thanked her quietly. "It's okay. You're not the problem here." From across the aisle, Paul Garrett, the senator's aide, had been watching the interactions with increasing interest. He seemed to be making mental notes of his own, occasionally glancing between Clara and the young woman with a calculating expression. Bradley Thompson, the actor, had pulled out his phone and appeared to be discreetly recording Clara's behavior. When he caught the young woman's eye, he gave her a subtle nod of solidarity. Thomas Ward, despite his own demanding behavior, had also begun to notice the disparate treatment. "Is there some problem with that passenger?" he asked Clara loudly when she brought him another scotch. "You seem to be ignoring her." Clara's smile tightened. "Just a seating mix-up," she said dismissively. "Nothing for you to worry about, Mr. Ward." The young woman heard this exchange and made another note in her book. As the flight progressed past its halfway point, the young woman asked to speak with the crew supervisor. "I'd like to speak with the lead purser, please," she said when Clara passed. Clara's expression hardened. "She's unavailable," she replied curtly, walking away without further acknowledgement. The young woman nodded to herself, as though this response was expected, and added it to her growing documentation. When the Wi-Fi signal strengthened as they passed over a major city below, the young woman connected her device and sent another secure email. The address line contained a government domain, EFA.gov, and was marked Aviation Operations Director, FAA. The email was brief but detailed, with timestamps and specific regulatory codes cited. In the galley, a small monitor pinged with an incoming message that only the captain could access. The subtle alert went unnoticed by Clara, who was busy preparing for the next service round. As Clara made an announcement about the remaining flight time, the cabin intercom glitched, cutting out mid-sentence. The young woman noted this technical malfunction with a precise timestamp. She also observed an emergency equipment cabinet that hadn't been properly secured. Its latch was visible from her seat, showing a red, unsecured indicator instead of the required green, locked status. The calm of the cabin was suddenly disrupted when Harold Miller, seated in 1C, slumped, Forward in his seat. "Harold," Ellen cried out, her voice sharp with fear. Before any crew member could respond, the young woman was on her feet. With swift, practiced movements, she checked Harold's pulse, positioned his head correctly, and began asking him targeted medical questions to assess his condition. "Sir? Can you hear me? Can you squeeze my hand? Do you know where you are?" Harold's eyes fluttered open, his momentary fainting spell passing. "Just got a little dizzy," he mumbled. The young woman continued her assessment with professional precision. "Your pulse is regular but rapid. Are you on any heart medications? When did you last have water?" Clara finally arrived, looking flustered. "What's happening here? Please return to your seat." The young woman ignored her, continuing her medical assessment. "He needs water and should lie back with his feet slightly elevated. He's experiencing mild dehydration and possibly low blood pressure from the cabin altitude." The professional, confidence in her voice silenced Clara momentarily. Other passengers watched in surprise as the young woman efficiently helped Harold recover, using proper medical protocols that suggested professional training. "Thank you, dear," Ellen said, clutching the young woman's hand gratefully. "Are you a doctor?" "I have emergency medical training," she replied simply, returning to her seat after ensuring Harold was stabilized. Clara stood frozen, her authority visibly shaken. The composed, educated response from the young woman she'd been mistreating had caught her off guard. Jamie approached with water for Harold, giving Clara a meaningful look that suggested growing discomfort with the situation. Back in her seat, the young woman resumed her documentation, adding details about the medical incident and the delayed crew response time. Clara's behavior began to shift from dismissive to anxious. Her movements became less fluid, her practiced smile more strained. She avoided eye contact with the young woman entirely, speaking in hushed tones with Jamie in the galley. When Clara disappeared into the crew rest area, Jamie approached the young woman's seat with a proper meal tray hidden under a napkin. "I saved this from first class," she whispered, placing it discreetly on the tray table. "I'm so sorry about everything." The young woman smiled genuinely. "It's okay. You're doing your best in a difficult situation." Jamie's eyes widened slightly at the response, suggesting she understood more than she initially let on. As the flight entered its final hours, the young woman used the satellite phone embedded in her seat's armrest. Unlike typical passengers who might call family or check in with work, she entered a complex access code that granted her immediate connection. "Authorization code Victor 973, she said quietly into the receiver. "This is Roberts. The report is in motion. Expect full documentation upon landing." The voice on the other end responded with professional acknowledgement. "Understood. Ground team has been notified." When she hung up, First Officer Bennett walked past again, this time leaning down slightly as he passed. "Everything all right in the cabin, ma'am?" he asked, his tone professionally neutral but his eyes communicating more. "Documenting everything as required," she responded quietly. He nodded once and continued toward the cockpit, where he had a brief but intense conversation with Captain Lee, gesturing subtly toward the first-class cabin. Minutes later, he emerged to speak with Clara, pulling her aside near the galley. "You might want to reconsider your approach to the passenger in 2A, he said in a low voice. Clara scoffed. "Why? She doesn't belong here." "That woman isn't who you think she is," he warned. "I know exactly who she is," Clara retorted. "Someone who doesn't know her place." Bennett's expression hardened. "That's your final position?" "Absolutely," Clara replied defiantly. As Bennett returned to the cockpit, murmurs began to spread among the passengers. Bradley Thompson was openly filming Clara now, his phone tracking her movements. Thomas Ward had stopped making demands and was watching the situation with calculating interest. The Millers whispered to each other, occasionally glancing sympathetically toward the young woman, emboldened by the growing tension and perhaps sensing her authority slipping. Clara made one final fatal mistake. She approached the young woman's seat and leaned down, her voice a harsh whisper. "When we land, I'll make sure you never fly first class again," she threatened, her eyes cold. "I've worked this route for 18 years. One word from me, and you'll be blacklisted. The young woman looked up calmly from her notebook, her expression composed and unnervingly confident. We'll see who flies again, she replied softly. As Clara walked away, the cabin seemed to hold its collective breath. Something had shifted. The power dynamics had reversed. And no one, except perhaps the young woman herself, knew exactly what would happen when the wheels touched down in San Francisco. As the plane cruised at 35,000 feet over America's heartland, Maya Roberts closed her leather notebook momentarily and gazed out at the endless expanse of clouds below. The tension in first class had become palpable. Other passengers kept stealing glances at her, their expressions ranging from curiosity to concern. The power dynamics aboard Flight 237 were shifting with each passing minute. Maya took a slow, deliberate breath and pressed the call button above her seat. The soft chime echoed through the cabin. She watched as Clara deliberately ignored it, busying herself with rearranging napkins that didn't need rearranging. After 3 minutes of being ignored, Maya tried again. This time, Jamie looked up from the galley, made eye contact with Clara, who shook her head slightly, then made a decision. The young flight attendant straightened her shoulders and walked directly to Maya's seat. "How can I help you?" Jamie asked, her voice professional but kind. "I'd like to speak with the crew supervisor, please," Maya said, her tone calm but firm. Before Jamie could respond, Clara materialized beside her. "I'm handling this section," she said sharply. "The crew supervisor is unavailable. She's busy with flight preparations." Maya nodded, as if this response confirmed something she already knew. "Thank you for the information," she said simply, making a note in her book. Clara narrowed her eyes. "What are you writing?" "Just keeping track of my journey," Maya replied evenly. When Clara stomped back to the galley, Maya pulled out her phone and connected to the in-flight Wi-Fi. She navigated to a secure messaging platform that required both facial recognition and a 6-digit passcode. The encryption protocols visible on her screen weren't standard consumer-grade security. She typed quickly, "Flight 237, NYC SFO, multiple violations observed. Crew member Clara Monroe, discriminatory service, food safety violation, emergency, equipment unsecured, faulty seatbelt mechanism in 2A, intercom malfunction. Recommend full compliance review upon landing. Authorization, Roberts, M Division 4. The message was addressed to Aviation Ops Director, FAA, and sent with a secure encryption that turned the text green when successfully transmitted. A small alert appeared on her screen. Report initiated. Tracking number FA 2306728. Thomas Ward, the tech CEO seated nearby, had been watching Maya with growing interest. His earlier entitlement had given way to a shrewd assessment of the situation unfolding before him. As a businessman accustomed to reading people, he sensed that the dynamic between Maya and Clara was more complex than a simple service dispute. The cabin intercom crackled to life, Captain Lee's voice filling the cabin. "Ladies and gentlemen, this is your captain speaking. We're experiencing some light turbulence ahead. Please return to your seats and fasten your seatbelts. Flight attendants, please secure the cabin for..." The intercom cut out mid-sentence, leaving an awkward silence. Maya made another note, including the exact time of the malfunction. First Officer Bennett emerged from the cockpit, presumably to deliver the rest of the message in person to the crew. As he passed Maya's seat, their eyes met briefly. There was recognition there, professional acknowledgement. Maya continued her inspection from her seat, noting that an emergency equipment cabinet near the galley was improperly secured. The latch showed a red indicator instead of the required green safety confirmation, another violation that most passengers would never notice. As the turbulence increased slightly, Clara rushed through the cabin checking seatbelts, except for Maya's. Jamie, following behind, paused at Maya's row. "May I check your seatbelt, ma'am?" she asked professionally. Maya nodded and demonstrated how the mechanism failed to click properly when pulled. Jamie frowned. "That's not right. Let me get you another seat." "No," Maya said quietly. "I need to stay in this seat. Please just document the malfunction." Jamie looked confused but nodded. I'll make a note of it. As Jamie walked away, Harold Miller, the elderly man in 1C, suddenly clutched his chest and began breathing heavily. "Harold!" Ellen cried, grabbing her husband's arm. "What's wrong?" Maya was on her feet instantly, her training evident in her quick, efficient movements. "Sir, are you having chest pain?" she asked, her voice calm but authoritative. Harold nodded. Weakly, his face pale and sweaty, Maya pressed the emergency call button and began loosening Harold's tie and collar. "Sir, I need you to look at me. Are you on any heart medications?" Nitroglycerin, Harold managed to say. "In my coat pocket." Maya located the medication quickly. "When did you last take this?" "This morning," Ellen answered, her voice shaking. Clara arrived, looking flustered. "What's happening?" "Possible cardiac event," Maya said crisply. "We need the emergency medical kit and AED now, and alert the captain that we may need a medical diversion." For a moment, Clara stood frozen, unused to taking orders from a passenger. "Now!" Maya said firmly, her voice carrying the unmistakable tone of authority. Clara hurried away, while Maya expertly helped Harold into a position that would maximize blood flow. She checked his pulse, counting silently, then placed a reassuring hand on his arm. "Your pulse is rapid but regular, Mr. Miller. Help is coming. Try to take slow, deep breaths for me." The cabin had grown silent, all eyes on the unfolding emergency. Bradley Thompson, the actor, had stood up to offer assistance but now sat back, recognizing that Maya clearly knew what she was doing. Jamie returned with the medical kit, which Maya opened with practiced familiarity. She pulled on gloves, then administered the nitroglycerin under Harold's tongue with expert precision. "This should help dilate your blood vessels and increase blood flow to your heart," Maya explained calmly to both Harold and the visibly terrified Ellen. "We're going to monitor you closely." Within minutes, Harold's color began to improve, and his breathing became less labored. By the time Captain Lee called back to check on the situation, Maya had stabilized him and was monitoring his vital signs. "The passenger is stable," she reported to Clara, who relayed the information to the captain. "But we should still have medical personnel meet the plane when we land." The way Maya handled the medical emergency had changed the atmosphere in the cabin. There was a new respect in the eyes of the passengers, and confusion from Clara, who clearly hadn't expected such competence. When Harold was stable and resting comfortably, Maya returned to her seat. As she sat down, she noticed several passengers watching her with newfound interest. "Are you a doctor?" Paul Garrett, the senator's aide, asked from across the aisle. "I have emergency medical training," Maya replied simply, not elaborating further. Rattled by the medical emergency and Maya's confident handling of it, Clara's composure began to visibly crack. Her usual polished demeanor was slipping, her movements becoming less fluid, her smile forced and tight. When she approached with a fresh round of beverages, she deliberately skipped Maya again. This time, Thomas Ward spoke up. "Excuse me," he said sharply. "I believe this lady hasn't been served." Clara's smile tightened. "I'll get to her." "You've skipped her twice now," Ellen Miller added, her earlier timidity replaced by indignation on Maya's behalf. "It's quite obvious." Clara's facade slipped further. "I'm following service protocol," she said defensively. "Is it protocol to serve moldy food?" Bradley Thompson asked loudly, holding up his phone. "Because I have some interesting footage here." Other passengers murmured in agreement. The collective awareness of Clara's treatment of Maya had reached a tipping point. Flustered and increasingly defensive, Clara retreated to the galley. Jamie, seeing an opportunity, quickly brought Maya a proper drink and a fresh snack. "I'm so sorry," she whispered. "This isn't right." "It's okay," Maya replied softly. "You're doing the best you can in a difficult situation." Jamie hesitated, then slipped Maya a folded napkin before continuing her duties. When Maya unfolded it, she found a handwritten note. "This isn't the first time Clara's done this. Some of us have tried to report her before." Maya tucked the note carefully into her notebook, then picked up the satellite phone embedded in her armrest. Unlike most passengers who rarely use the expensive in-flight phone service, Maya entered a complex access code that bypassed the payment screen. "Authorization code Victor Echo 479, she said quietly. "This is Roberts. The report is in motion. Ground team should be notified for immediate action upon landing." The voice on the other end responded professionally. "Understood, Inspector Roberts. Your report is being processed in real time. Ground team is being assembled." She hung up. Maya noticed First Officer Bennett watching from near the cockpit door. He approached under the pretense of checking the cabin. "Everything all right, ma'am?" he asked formally. "Multiple violations observed, Officer Bennett," Maya replied quietly. "I've already initiated protocol." Bennett nodded almost imperceptibly. "Captain Lee has been informed of unusual service patterns in first class." "Good," Maya said. "Please ensure all flight logs and surveillance footage are preserved upon landing." Bennett gave a slight nod before returning to the cockpit. Minutes later, Clara emerged from the galley after an apparent conversation with the captain. Her face was flushed, her movements agitated. She approached Maya's seat, leaning down to whisper harshly, "I don't know what game you're playing, but this is my aircraft. When we land, I'll make sure you never fly first class again." Maya looked up calmly from her notebook, her eyes steady and confident. "We'll see who flies again." The quiet confidence in Maya's voice seemed to unsettle Clara even further. She straightened up, her expression wavering between anger and uncertainty before marching back to the galley. By now, most of the first-class passengers were openly watching the situation unfold. Some, like Bradley Thompson, were documenting it on their phones. Others, like the Millers, were whispering among themselves. Thomas Ward was on his tablet, apparently researching something with great interest. As the plane began its initial descent toward San Francisco, the power balance in the cabin had shifted completely. The mystery surrounding Maya Roberts was about to unravel, and Clara Monroe's world was about to change forever. The cabin atmosphere grew increasingly tense as Flight 237 began its descent into San Francisco. First Officer Bennett had returned to the cockpit after his brief conversation with Maya, but not before stopping at the crew station to check something on the flight manifest. Bennett scanned the passenger list carefully, his expression changing, when he reached seat 2A. The digital manifest showed something most crew members hadn't noticed: a small government designation code and the words, "Special Security Clearance, FAA Oversight Division," next to Maya Roberts' name. His face paled slightly as he hurried back to the cockpit, pulling Captain Lee aside for a private conversation. Meanwhile, Clara had retreated to the galley, visibly flustered by her confrontation with Maya. Jamie approached her cautiously. "Clara, maybe we should just—" "Mind your own business," Clara snapped. "That woman is just trying to get free upgrades or compensation. I've seen it 100 times. Jamie bit her lip, unconvinced. When Clara stormed off to the rear galley, Jamie seized the opportunity. She glanced at Maya's seat and noticed she had gone to the lavatory. With a quick decision, Jamie checked Maya's phone that had been left on the seat. A breach of protocol, but she needed to know what was happening. The phone's lock screen showed a notification from a secure government server and partially visible beneath it, the edge of an official FAA badge photo. Jamie's eyes widened as she quickly moved away before Maya returned. The revelation hit her hard. Maya wasn't just any passenger. She was an FAA inspector, likely conducting an undercover assessment. Jamie's hands trembled slightly as she continued her duties, now understanding the gravity of the situation. As Maya returned to her seat, the plane suddenly experienced a communication disruption. The Wi-Fi connectivity indicator on the overhead panel switched from green to red. Several passengers groaned in frustration as their devices lost internet access. What they didn't know was that this wasn't a random technical glitch. Maya had activated a secure protocol that temporarily disabled non-essential communications, a standard procedure during certain types of federal inspections. Only the plane's critical systems and the secure satellite link remained operational. Ellen Miller, who had been watching the unfolding drama with increasing interest, had discreetly used her phone to record Clara's behavior before the Wi-Fi cut out. She leaned toward her husband. "Someone needs to stop her," she whispered. "This isn't right, no matter who that young woman is." Harold nodded in agreement, still recovering from his earlier health scare. That girl knew exactly what to do when I needed help. Clara wouldn't even look at her. Their conversation was interrupted when Captain Lee's voice came over the intercom. "Ladies and gentlemen, this is your captain speaking. We're beginning our initial descent into San Francisco. The local time is 11:42 a.m., and the weather is clear with excellent visibility. Flight attendants, please prepare the cabin for landing." There was a brief pause before he added, "And I'd like to thank all our passengers for flying with us today, especially those providing valuable feedback on our service standards." The unusual addition to the standard announcement didn't go unnoticed. Several passengers glanced at Maya, whose expression remained neutral as she made another note in her book. In the cockpit, First Officer Bennett had just sent an encrypted message to air traffic control. Onboard inspector confirmed. "Prepare ground security." The response came quickly. "Acknowledged. Security team standing by at gate 34B. Clara, unaware of these developments, continued the landing preparation with forced professionalism. When she reached Maya's row, she deliberately avoided eye contact, checking seatbelts on either side but skipping her completely. Maya spoke up, her voice carrying just enough to be heard by nearby passengers. "Excuse me, but my seatbelt is malfunctioning. It's a safety violation that should be documented." Clara froze momentarily, then replied through clenched teeth, "I'm sure you'll be fine for landing." Maya pulled out her notebook. "That's violation number 12 today. Federal Aviation Regulation 121-317 requires all passengers to have functioning seatbelts for landing. Failure to address a reported malfunction is a serious safety breach." The specific citation of the FAA regulation caught Clara off guard. Her confident demeanor faltered as she looked at Maya with new uncertainty. "Who are you?" she asked, her voice barely above a whisper. Maya merely smiled slightly and returned to her notebook. Clara laughed nervously, still in denial about the situation. "You're nobody, just another passenger trying to get special treatment." By now, several passengers were openly recording the interaction. Thomas Ward had put away his phone calls and emails to focus entirely on the unfolding drama. Bradley Thompson no longer bothered to hide that he was filming everything. As the plane descended through 10,000 feet, Maya decided it was time. She caught Captain Lee's eye as he glanced back through the cockpit door and gave a slight nod. He returned the gesture and picked up the intercom. "Ladies and gentlemen, with the permission of our flight crew, we have a special announcement from one of our passengers." Clara looked up in shock as Maya stood and took the phone handset from Jamie, who had brought it to her with an apologetic glance toward Clara. Maya's voice was clear and authoritative as it came through the cabin speakers. "Good morning, everyone. My name is Maya Roberts, and I'm a Federal Aviation Administration inspector with the Flight Standards Service. This flight has been part of a high-level FAA compliance operation, evaluating service standards, safety protocols, and adherence to federal anti-discrimination regulations." A collective gasp went through the cabin. Clara's face drained of color. As she gripped a nearby seat for support, Maya continued calmly, "Everything that has occurred on this flight has been documented and will be part of an official report. I want to thank those passengers and crew members who demonstrated professionalism and kindness throughout this journey." She handed the phone back to Jamie and returned to her seat amid stunned silence. Clara stood frozen in the aisle, her career flashing before her eyes. 18 years of service, now potentially ending in disgrace. She approached Maya with trembling hands. "This is a mistake," she said, her voice wavering between anger and panic. "You targeted me specifically. This isn't fair. Every passenger on this flight deserves equal service and safety considerations," Maya replied evenly. "Nothing more, nothing less." Clara turned to the other passengers desperately. "She's lying. I've never discriminated against anyone." But her protest fell on deaf ears. Thomas Ward shook his head in disgust. "I watched you give her moldy food. We all did." "And deny her drinks," Ellen added firmly. "And ignore safety concerns," Bradley Thompson chimed in, holding up his phone. "All on video." Jamie stepped forward, her voice quiet but determined. It's not just today, Clara. You've done this before. Many times. Clara's face contorted with a mix of rage and fear. You little traitor! You have no idea what you're talking about. That's enough. Captain Lee's authoritative voice cut through as he emerged from the cockpit. Ms. Monroe, please return to your station for landing. We'll address this on the ground. Clara retreated to the galley, muttering about setups and conspiracies, her composure completely shattered. As the plane descended toward San Francisco International Airport, passengers could see a collection of vehicles with flashing lights positioned. Near their arrival gate, several individuals in dark suits and FAA windbreakers stood waiting on the tarmac. Looks like your friends are waiting, Harold Miller said to Maya with a small smile. Maya nodded. Standard protocol for an inspection of this nature. Thomas Ward leaned across the aisle. I've been on hundreds of flights, and I've never seen anything like what happened today. Will there be serious consequences? The FAA takes discrimination and safety violations very seriously, Maya replied diplomatically. The evidence will be reviewed thoroughly. As the plane touched down and taxied toward the gate, passengers pressed against windows to see the unusual, welcoming committee. News vans had already gathered at a distance, suggesting that word of the undercover inspection had somehow leaked to the media. Captain Lee made one final announcement before reaching the gate. Ladies and gentlemen, I want to thank Ms. Roberts for her presence and service on today's flight. The safety and fair treatment of all our passengers is our highest priority, and we welcome the FAA's oversight in helping us maintain those standards. The subtle but powerful shift in respect wasn't lost on anyone in the cabin. The same crew that had allowed Clara to discriminate against Maya was now acknowledging her authority. As the plane came to a final stop at the gate, Maya remained seated, allowing her thoughts to drift momentarily to the past. She recalled being 16, sitting beside her mother, a brilliant aviation engineer, on a flight much like this one. She remembered the flight attendant who had refused to serve her mother properly, the whispered insults, the humiliation. And later, she remembered her mother being fired after false reports were filed about her work, reports that Maya now knew had been racially motivated. That trauma had set Maya on her path. Through years of determined study and work, she had risen through the ranks of aviation regulation to become one of the FAA's most respected inspectors. Today wasn't just about one flight or one flight attendant. It was about changing the system that had failed her mother. As passengers prepared to deplane, several approached Maya to express their support. Thomas Ward handed her his business card. I apologize for not speaking up sooner, he said, his earlier arrogance replaced by genuine contrition. If you need a witness statement, my office will cooperate fully. Thank you, Maya replied. Silence is part of the problem. Speaking up makes a difference. Bradley Thompson approached next. I have everything on video, he said quietly. Just let me know where to send it. Even as these conversations took place, Jamie moved through the cabin, collecting final items. As she passed Maya, she discreetly slipped her another folded note. This one read, "This isn't the first time Clara's done this. There are at least 6 of us who can testify. Thank you for finally doing something." The note was signed with just an initial J, providing Jamie some protection while still offering crucial evidence. Maya carefully placed this note with her other documentation, then checked her phone. She had received clearance to initiate her post-flight protocol, retain all logs, review Clara Monroe's 2-year in-flight footage. With all the evidence gathered and passengers beginning to file out, Maya remained seated, watching as Clara made one last desperate attempt to salvage her career. The flight attendant was frantically trying to delete messages from her work tablet, unaware that Maya had already authorized a complete data clone of all crew devices mid-flight. As Maya finally stood to leave, her phone pinged with a secure, "How much the T-Series round team in place. Prepare for extraction and interview sequence." She looked out the window at the assembled FAA officials waiting on the jetway. The reckoning had arrived. For Clara Monroe, for the airline, and for an industry that had too often turned a blind eye to discrimination at 35,000 feet. Maya took a deep breath and prepared to exit the plane that had been both her battleground and her instrument of justice. The real work was just beginning. A tense silence blanketed the first-class cabin of Flight 237 as it began its final approach into San Francisco International Airport. Maya's announcement had left passengers stunned, some still processing the revelation that the young black woman who'd been subjected to Clara's discrimination was actually a federal inspector. The cabin felt like a courtroom awaiting judgment, with every eye darting between Maya's composed figure and Clara's crumbling facade. The city skyline came into view through the windows, sunlight glinting off the bay waters. In any other circumstance, passengers would have been admiring the view or gathering their belongings. Instead, they sat rigid in anticipation of what would happen when those wheels touched the ground. Clara, her hands visibly trembling, moved through the cabin with mechanical precision, performing final landing checks with an artificial smile plastered across her face. The transformation was jarring. Where she had been dismissive and cold toward Maya before, she now offered overly enthusiastic service. "Can I get you anything before we land?" Clara asked Maya with forced brightness, her voice pitched unnaturally high. "Another pillow? Water? Anything at all?" Maya looked up calmly. "No, thank you. I have everything I need." She gestured to her notebook, now filled with detailed observations that would soon become evidence. No one was fooled by Clara's sudden change in behavior. Thomas Ward rolled his eyes in disgust. The Millers exchanged knowing glances. Bradley Thompson continued filming discreetly. When Clara retreated to the galley, her face crumpled, the reality of her situation finally sinking in. Jamie watched her with a mix of pity and resolve before approaching Maya's seat. "I just want you to know," Jamie whispered, leaning close to avoid being overheard. "You're not the first person she's treated this way. Some of us have tried to report her before, but nothing ever happened." Maya nodded. "That stops today. Don't be afraid to speak the truth during the investigation. You did the right thing by trying to help." Jamie's eyes glistened slightly. "I should have done more." "Standing up to established power structures takes courage," Maya replied. "The important thing is that you're speaking up now." The plane descended through a layer of clouds, momentarily obscuring the view before the entire Bay Area spread out beneath them. The intercom crackled to life with Captain Lee's voice. "Ladies and gentlemen, we're making our final approach into San Francisco. Local time is 11:57 a.m. with clear skies and a temperature of 68 degrees. On behalf of our crew, I would like to thank Ms. Roberts for her presence and service on today's flight." The public acknowledgement from the captain sent another wave of murmurs through the cabin. It was a subtle but powerful shift in respect, an airline captain officially recognizing the authority of the woman his crew had mistreated. As the plane banked gently toward the runway, Maya closed her eyes briefly, allowing herself a rare moment of reflection. Behind her composed exterior, memories surfaced of being 16 years old, sitting beside her mother on a cross-country flight. Vanessa Roberts had been one of the few black female aviation engineers in the country, traveling to present her research on turbine safety improvements. Maya remembered how the flight attendant had ignored her mother's requests, served her cold food, and whispered insulting comments when passing their seats. She remembered her mother's quiet dignity in the face of humiliation, and later, the devastation when Vanessa was fired after false reports about her work. Reports Maya now knew had been racially motivated. "Never let them see how deeply it cuts," her mother had told her, "but never stop fighting for what's right." That trauma had shaped Maya's path, driving her through college, law school, and finally to the FAA, where she had quickly risen through the ranks to become one of their most respected inspectors. Today wasn't just about one flight attendant or one airline. It was about changing a system that had failed her mother and countless others. Maya opened her eyes, her resolve strengthened. By the memory, she noticed Thomas Ward watching her from across the aisle. "I'm sorry I didn't say something sooner," he said, his earlier entitled demeanor replaced by genuine contrition. "I saw what was happening but stayed focused on my own concerns." "Silence is part of the problem," Maya replied, "but it's never too late to speak up." Ward nodded, offering his business card. "If you need witness testimony for your report, my office will cooperate fully." Bradley Thompson approached next, holding out his phone. "I've got everything recorded, from the meal incident to her threats. Just tell me where to send it. The actor, known for playing tough characters on screen, seemed genuinely affected by what he'd witnessed. I've seen this kind of thing happen before, but never did anything. That ends today. One by one, other first-class passengers came forward, offering their observations and contact information. The collective shift was remarkable, from passive observers to active witnesses ready to stand up for justice. Ellen Miller reached across the aisle to squeeze Maya's hand. What you're doing is important, dear. Harold and I have flown first class for 30 years, and we've seen this behavior too often. Thank you for taking a stand. As the passengers voiced their support, Maya noticed Paul Garrett, the senator's aide, watching the proceedings with calculating interest. He hadn't joined the others in offering testimony, instead typing rapidly on his phone. She made a mental note to follow up on his role later. The plane's descent continued, the ground drawing closer. Through the windows, several official vehicles with flashing lights were visible near their arrival gate, the FAA ground team, already in position. In the galley, Clara made one last desperate attempt to regain control. She approached Jamie with frantic energy. "You need to back me up," she hissed. "Tell them I always follow protocol, it's just a misunderstanding." Jamie stepped back, shaking her head. "I can't do that, Clara, not anymore. I trained you, I got you this route." Clara's voice rose, drawing attention from nearby passengers. "And I'm grateful for that," Jamie replied steadily. "But what you did today, what you've done many times, it's wrong. I won't lie for you." Clara's face contorted with rage and fear. "You'll regret this. Your career is over before it even started." Actually, Maya's calm voice cut through as she approached. "Threatening a potential witness is another federal violation. You might want to reconsider your approach, Ms. Monroe." Clara turned, her composure completely shattered. "This is a setup. You targeted me specifically." "Every passenger deserves equal treatment and safety considerations," Maya replied evenly. "Nothing more, nothing less." The plane touched down with a gentle bump, the engines reversing thrust as they slowed along the runway. Captain Lee's voice came over the intercom once more. "Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to San Francisco. Please remain seated with your seatbelts fastened until we reach the gate, and the fasten seatbelt sign has been turned off. Local authorities have requested that we follow special deplaning procedures today. Thank you for your cooperation." As they taxied toward the terminal, Maya received a discreet ping on her secure phone. "Ground team in place. Prepare for extraction and interview sequence." She looked out the window to see the assembled FAA officials waiting on the jetway, their windbreakers bearing the distinctive agency insignia. The reckoning had arrived, not just for Clara Monroe, but for an airline culture that had allowed discrimination to flourish unchecked at 35,000 feet. The jet bridge connected to Flight 237. With a soft thump, outside the windows, the morning sun illuminated a scene unlike any regular arrival. A wall of officials in dark suits and FAA windbreakers lined the jet bridge, while beyond them, through the terminal windows, news vans could be seen gathering. In the distance, Captain Lee emerged from the cockpit, his expression grave as he surveyed the first-class cabin. After a brief conversation with a flight attendant, he made an unusual announcement. "Ladies and gentlemen, at the request of federal authorities, we will be implementing special deplaning procedures. Our FAA inspector will deplane first, followed by crew members. All passengers are asked to remain seated until further instructions are given." The captain turned to Maya with a respectful nod. "Ms. Roberts, whenever you're ready." Clara, who had been frantically whispering to another flight attendant, froze at this development. The traditional hierarchy of deplaning, where crew always exited last, had been completely upended, underscoring the seriousness of the situation. Maya gathered her notebook and small carry-on with methodical precision. As she stood, several passengers nodded respectfully. Ellen Miller reached out to briefly touch her arm in silent support. Bradley Thompson gave her a thumbs up while still recording. "Thank you all for your cooperation today," Maya addressed the cabin with calm professionalism. "Your willingness to speak up makes a difference in creating safer skies for everyone." She moved toward the exit, passing Clara, who stood rigid by the galley, her face ashen. Maya paused briefly beside her. "Your actions today will have consequences, Ms. Monroe," she said quietly. "But so will the airline's failure to address previous complaints about your behavior. This is about systemic accountability, not just individual actions." Clara opened her mouth to respond, but no words came out. The reality of her situation had finally silenced her completely. As Maya stepped onto the jet bridge, several agents nodded with respect. A tall woman in a crisp suit approached. "Inspector Roberts," she greeted Maya formally. "I'm Director Allison Palmer. The team is assembled and ready for your briefing." "Thank you, Director," Maya replied. "I've documented 12 clear violations, with supporting evidence from multiple passengers and crew members." Palmer nodded, gesturing toward a private room, just off the gate area. "We've set up the interview space as requested. The airline representatives are waiting." Meanwhile, back on the plane, the crew had been instructed to deplane next. Clara, realizing she couldn't avoid what was coming, attempted to exit discreetly with other attendants, blending into the group. As she reached the door, a firm voice stopped her. "Clara Monroe, you're requested for immediate interview. Please, follow Agent Davidson." A stone-faced agent gestured toward a separate exit where 2 more officials waited. Clara looked around desperately, as if searching for an escape route. "This is ridiculous," she protested, her voice rising. "I've been loyal to this airline for 18 years. You can't treat me like a criminal." Her outburst echoed down the jet bridge, clearly audible to the waiting passengers. Several pulled out phones, capturing her meltdown on video. "Ms. Monroe," the agent replied calmly. "This is a standard procedural interview following a federal inspection. Your cooperation is required by law." Clara's protests grew louder as she was escorted away. "This is a setup. That woman targeted me specifically. Ask anyone. I've never discriminated against anybody." From their seats in first class, passengers exchanged glances. Thomas Ward shook his head in disgust. "Unbelievable," he muttered. "Even now, she doesn't get it." Ellen Miller leaned toward her husband. 18 years of treating people like that. How many others suffered in silence? The remaining crew members deplaned quietly, their expressions a mix of shock and resignation. Jamie was the last to exit, pausing briefly to look back at the passengers who had witnessed everything. "I'm sorry," she said simply, before following her colleagues. In the terminal, the situation quickly escalated. Passengers were finally allowed to deplane, emerging into a terminal buzzing with activity. FAA officials had cordoned off an area for witness statements, and several first-class passengers volunteered to provide immediate testimony. Ellen Miller, supporting her husband as he walked slowly down the jet bridge, approached an FAA agent. "We'd like to make a statement," she said firmly. The agent led them to a seating area where they could provide their account. Ellen spoke with unexpected authority. "I'm a retired federal judge," she revealed, "and what I witnessed today was straight-up discrimination. There's no ambiguity here." Bradley Thompson handed over his phone footage. "I got everything from the meal incident to her final threats. It's all yours." Thomas Ward was already on his phone with his legal team. "I want our company to file a formal complaint as well. This goes beyond one bad employee. The airline has a responsibility here." In a private room just off the gate area, Maya sat across from Director Palmer and 2 other senior FAA officials. Her notebook lay open between them, alongside a digital tablet displaying her real-time report. 12 violations in a single flight is unprecedented, Palmer noted, scrolling through the documentation. Food safety, discriminatory service, emergency equipment unsecured, faulty seatbelt mechanisms, intercom malfunctions, and that's before we get to the witness testimonies about Ms. Monroe's behavior. "The pattern suggests systemic issues, not isolated incidents," Maya replied. "According to multiple crew statements, Ms. Monroe has a history of similar behavior that has gone unchecked." In an adjacent room, Jamie sat nervously, hands clasped tightly in her lap as she prepared to give her statement. When the interviewer entered, she took a deep breath. "I need to tell you everything," she began, her voice shaking slightly. "It's not just today. Clara has been doing this for years." Tears filled her eyes as she described what she had witnessed during her training. She made racially charged comments about passengers all the time. She'd give certain travelers, especially people of color in first class, different service, cold food, forgetting their requests, seating them near lavatories, little things that were hard to prove but added up. "Did you report this behavior?" the interviewer asked. Jamie nodded miserably. 3 times. Nothing ever happened. The last time I tried, my supervisor said I should focus on learning the ropes instead of creating problems. Across the terminal, in a room with considerably less comfortable seating, Clara sat across from 2 stern-faced investigators. Her initial bluster had given way to a desperate attempt at damage control. "You don't understand the pressures we're under," she insisted. "The airline expects perfect service with minimal staffing. Sometimes corners get cut. It's not personal." "So you're saying the airline policy directed you to serve moldy food to Ms. Roberts?" an investigator asked flatly. "No, that was a mistake. Anyone could have missed that. And the pattern of ignoring her requests while attending to others? The failure to address a reported seatbelt malfunction? The direct threats you made about ensuring she never flies first class again?" Clara shifted tactics. "Look, it's poor training and company policy. We're not given proper diversity training. The airline should be held responsible, not individual flight attendants just doing their jobs." The investigator slid a folder across the table. "We have documentation of passenger complaints specifically naming you from the past 2 years. 12 formal complaints, all with similar patterns of behavior, all dismissed by airline HR." Clara's face drained of color as she realized the depth of the investigation. Meanwhile, Captain Lee had joined Maya and Director Palmer. His testimony provided another critical perspective. "I suspected there were service inconsistencies," he admitted, "but I didn't want to rock the boat. The culture discourages pilots from interfering with cabin crew management." "Sometimes the boat needs rocking, Captain," Maya replied evenly, "especially when passengers' rights and dignity are at stake." Lee nodded, accepting the rebuke. "You're absolutely right, Inspector. I should have done more." As the interviews continued, a distinguished silver-haired man in an impeccable suit arrived at the terminal. Frederick Wilson, the FAA director for the Western region, had come personally to oversee the situation, a sign of how seriously the agency was taking the incident. He greeted Maya with evident respect. "Inspector Roberts, your reputation precedes you. This is the most detailed in-flight audit we've received in my 15 years with the agency." Maya stood to shake his hand. "Thank you for responding so quickly, Director Wilson. When the alert came through about multiple violations involving discrimination, I wanted to be here personally," Wilson explained. "The administrator in Washington is already aware and fully supportive of aggressive action." He handed Maya an official commendation slip, a rare on-the-spot recognition from FAA leadership. "Your professionalism under difficult circumstances exemplifies the best of our agency." As they discussed next steps, Maya made an unexpected request. "Sir, I believe this case warrants more than just sanctions against Ms. Monroe." Wilson raised an eyebrow. "What are you suggesting?" "A full FAA audit of the airline's entire crew, training program and HR complaint procedures," Maya said firmly. "The evidence suggests a pattern of concealment and failure to address discriminatory behavior. Ms. Monroe is a symptom of a larger problem." Wilson considered this for a moment. "That would be a significant escalation. The airline will fight it. They can fight it in public or cooperate in private, but either way, this stops now," Maya replied. "What happened today has happened to countless others who didn't have the authority I do. They deserve justice too." Wilson nodded slowly. "I'll authorize the expanded investigation immediately. The airline's executives have been summoned. They should arrive within the hour." Outside in the terminal, news of the incident had begun to spread. Passengers from other flights watched curiously as officials moved purposefully through the gate area. Several reporters had gathered at the security perimeter, attempting to piece together what was happening. Clara emerged from her interview room looking shattered, escorted by 2 FAA officials. Her perfect uniform was now rumpled. Her carefully styled hair falling loose around a face etched with the realization that her career was effectively over. As she was led through the terminal, she spotted Maya speaking with Director Wilson and made one last, desperate attempt to salvage the situation. Breaking away from her escorts, she approached Maya with frantic energy. "Please," she begged, her voice cracking. "This will ruin me. 18 years of service, doesn't that count for anything? I have a mortgage, car payments." Maya faced her calmly. "Ms. Monroe, this isn't about ruining you. It's about accountability. Every passenger deserves to be treated with dignity and respect, regardless of their race, gender, or background. The rules apply equally to everyone, in the air and on the ground." "But it was just one flight," Clara protested. "One bad day." "We both know that's not true," Maya replied softly. "The evidence shows a pattern of behavior over years, not days. And today, you happen to direct that behavior toward someone who could do something about it." Clara's shoulders slumped as the reality of her situation finally sank in. "What happens now?" "You'll be suspended pending the conclusion of the investigation," Maya explained. "Your airline will determine final employment actions based on our findings. I recommend you cooperate fully with investigators. It will be considered in the final report." As Clara was led away, Jamie approached hesitantly. "Is it really going to change anything?" she asked. "The system protected her for so long." Maya smiled, genuine warmth breaking through her professional demeanor. "Yes, it will, because people like you had the courage to speak up. Change happens when silence ends." The morning sun streamed through the terminal windows as Maya gathered her materials. Her first major undercover inspection had yielded far more than she'd anticipated, not just evidence against one flight attendant, but the foundation for a comprehensive investigation into an airline culture that had allowed discrimination to flourish unchecked. As she prepared to leave for the FAA field office, she took one last look at the gate where Flight 237 had arrived. What had begun as a routine inspection had become something much more significant, a turning point perhaps, in how the industry addressed the treatment of all passengers, regardless of who they appeared to be. Maya thought of her mother, who never lived to see this day. "We did it, Mom," she whispered. "The sky's a little safer now." 24 hours after Flight 237 touched down in San Francisco, Maya Roberts stood in her modest Oakland apartment, watching her television in disbelief. The story had exploded beyond anything she'd anticipated. "Breaking tonight," the news anchor announced. Shocking footage from a commercial flight shows a flight attendant denying proper service to a black passenger, who turned out to be an undercover Federal Aviation Administration inspector. The screen cut to smartphone video taken by Bradley Thompson, the actor who had been seated across from Maya. The footage clearly showed Clara snatching away Maya's tray with the moldy food, saying, "Don't expect room service up here," with unmistakable contempt in her voice. The view counter at the bottom of the screen ticked upward in real time. 3.2 million views and climbing rapidly. Social media hashtags flashed across the bottom of the screen. Fly fair, Maya Roberts, Clara grounded. Maya's phone hadn't stopped buzzing since early morning. Interview requests from major networks, messages of support from colleagues, and official communications from FAA headquarters in Washington all competed for her attention. She had declined all media appearances, despite her agency's public affairs team telling her that Good Morning America, CNN, and every major network was practically begging for an exclusive. "This isn't about fame," she had told Director Wilson firmly. "It's about fixing the system." Her secure work phone chimed with a priority message. It was from Wilson himself. "Roberts, the airline just released their statement. Damage control mode. Take a look." Maya switched to her laptop and found the airline's official response, posted just minutes earlier. "We at Transcontinental Airways are deeply committed to ensuring all passengers receive equal treatment and respect. We are aware of an incident on a recent flight and take these matters very seriously. The employee in question has been suspended pending a full investigation. Transcontinental has a zero-tolerance policy for discrimination of any kind, and we are cooperating fully with federal authorities. We apologize to any passengers affected by this isolated incident." Maya shook her head at the carefully crafted corporate language. She opened her agency email and drafted a public response, which she knew would be approved and released by headquarters within hours. The incident on transcontinental flight 237 was not isolated, as evidence indicates a pattern of behavior that went unchallenged despite multiple previous complaints. The FAA has documented 12 specific violations during this single flight, including food safety issues, discrimination based on perceived race and class, failure to address reported safety equipment malfunctions, and improper security of emergency equipment. The agency has initiated a comprehensive review of Transcontinental Airways training procedures, complaint resolution processes, and safety compliance systems. We will ensure appropriate accountability at all levels. She hit send, knowing her direct fact-based approach would cut through the airline's public relations spin. Within minutes, her phone rang. Director Wilson himself. "That was perfect, Roberts," he said without preamble. "Headquarters is releasing it verbatim. The airline CEO is furious, of course, but he's also scared. Their stock dropped 8% today, and their biggest corporate accounts are asking questions." "Good," Maya replied simply. "Fear motivates change when ethics don't." "The Secretary of Transportation called me personally," Wilson continued. "This case has their attention at the highest levels. They're watching how we handle it." After the call ended, Maya allowed herself a rare moment of satisfaction. The system that had protected people like Clara for years was finally being challenged. But her work was far from over. Her laptop pinged with another notification. Ellen Miller, the retired judge from the flight, had published an op-ed in the Washington Post detailing what she had witnessed, calling it a textbook case of discrimination that reflects deeper problems in our transportation systems. Coming from a respected former federal judge, the piece carried significant weight. Maya's doorbell rang, a courier with a thick envelope marked Confidential FAA Inspector Roberts. Inside was a stack of printed emails from Transcontinental Airways internal servers obtained through the agency's investigative authority. The documents revealed a disturbing pattern. Clara Monroe had been the subject of at least 23 passenger complaints over the past 5 years, all with similar allegations of discriminatory treatment. In each case, the airline's HR department had dismissed or downplayed the complaints. One email from a senior HR director read, "Monroe is one of our most experienced FAs with connections to board members. Suggest we classify this as a service misunderstanding and offer the usual miles. Compensation to make it go away." Maya documented each piece of evidence meticulously, building a case that went far beyond one flight attendant's behavior to expose a corporate culture that enabled discrimination. By evening, the story had grown even larger. A former Transcontinental flight attendant appeared on a cable news show, her identity concealed, sharing her experiences working alongside Clara. "It wasn't just passengers of color," the anonymous whistleblower explained. "It was anyone she deemed not first-class material. Younger, travelers, casual dressers, people with regional accents. If you didn't fit her image of wealth and privilege, you got different treatment." The whistleblower's account prompted others to come forward. By midnight, a dedicated online forum had collected testimonies from over 40 former Transcontinental employees, all describing a pattern of unchecked discriminatory behavior not just from Clara, but throughout the airline's premium service divisions. The next morning, Maya received another priority call from Director Wilson. "The airline's legal team is in full panic mode," he reported. "They're requesting a closed-door meeting to discuss a comprehensive resolution before the full investigation proceeds." "They're afraid of what else we'll find," Maya observed. "Exactly. How do you want to handle this?" Maya considered for a moment. "I want to be in that meeting. They need to understand this isn't going away with a settlement or press release." 3 hours later, Maya sat in a conference room at FAA's regional headquarters, facing Transcontinental Airways' executive team. The airline's CEO, Lawrence Bradshaw, looked like he hadn't slept in days. Their general counsel and head of operations flanked him, along with 2 crisis management consultants. Director Wilson opened the meeting. "We've reviewed the preliminary evidence and have grounds for a comprehensive safety and compliance audit of Transcontinental's entire operation. Inspector Roberts will outline our concerns." Maya placed a thick folder on the table. We've documented a systemic failure to address discriminatory behavior, safety violations, and passenger complaints. The evidence suggests these aren't isolated incidents but symptoms of larger organizational problems. Bradshaw leaned forward. We understand the seriousness of the situation. Ms. Monroe's behavior was unacceptable, and she's been terminated effective immediately. We're prepared to offer a substantial settlement to any affected passengers and implement new diversity training for all staff. That's insufficient, Maya replied calmly. This goes beyond one employee. Your own internal documents show a pattern of dismissing legitimate complaints and protecting problematic staff. She slid copies of the internal emails across the table. The executives' faces paled as they recognized their own communications. How did you get these? The general counsel asked, his voice tight. Federal investigation, Director Wilson replied, simply. We have subpoena power, Maya continued. We're requiring a complete overhaul of your complaint handling procedures, mandatory review of all closed discrimination cases from the past 5 years, and installation of independent monitors for your crew training program. The meeting lasted 4 hours, with the airline executives gradually moving from resistance to reluctant acceptance as the weight of evidence and potential penalties became clear. By the end, they had agreed to all of Maya's key demands, including a public acknowledgement of systemic failures and a commitment to transparent reforms. As Maya left the building, her phone buzzed with a text from Jamie, the young flight attendant who had shown kindness during the fateful flight. Just heard Clara's been fired. Airline announced comprehensive reforms to our training. Is this really happening? Thank you for everything. Maya smiled and typed back. It's happening. Change takes courage, like what you showed on that flight. Later that evening, Maya finally allowed herself to visit her mother's grave at a small cemetery in Richmond. She knelt beside the simple headstone that read, Vanessa Roberts, 1962-2016, engineer, mother, pioneer. We did it, Mom, she said softly, placing fresh flowers beside the marker. The sky's a little safer now. As she stood to leave, her phone chimed with an email notification. It was from FAA headquarters, confirming her promotion to lead field inspector with oversight of a new specialized unit focused on service standards and anti-discrimination compliance. The position came with the authority to conduct random undercover inspections across multiple airlines. The email ended with a personal note from the FAA administrator. Your work on the transcontinental case exemplifies the highest standards of our agency. This new role will help ensure what happened on Flight 237 doesn't happen to others. The traveling public deserves nothing less. Maya took one last look at her mother's grave before heading home. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, but tonight, she had fulfilled a promise made long ago to the woman who had taught her to stand tall in the face of injustice. 3 months after the Flight 237 incident, Maya Roberts stood before a classroom of 25 new FAA inspector trainees. The agency had fast-tracked the creation of a specialized unit focused on service standards and compliance, with Maya as its head. The sky belongs to everyone, she told the diverse group of recruits. Your job isn't just about measuring legroom or counting life vests. You are the difference between fear and fairness at 35,000 feet. The trainees, a mix of former flight crew, aviation safety specialists, and civil rights attorneys, listened intently. The Transcontinental Airways case had become required study for all new inspectors, transforming FAA training curriculum nationwide. After the lecture, Maya checked her phone to find a news alert. Clara Monroe had finally broken her silence, posting a written statement on social media that was already generating controversy. While I regret if any passengers felt uncomfortable on my flights, Clara had written, I maintain that I was simply upholding the high standards expected in premium cabins. The current climate makes it impossible for flight attendants to maintain order without being accused of discrimination. I was made a scapegoat for an industry-wide issue. The non-apology was being torn apart online, with commentators noting its defensive tone and failure to acknowledge the documented evidence against her. Clara's attempt to rehabilitate her image had backfired spectacularly, generating a fresh wave of criticism and further damaging what remained of her reputation. Maya sighed and put away her phone. Clara still didn't understand that this had never been about punishing one person. It was about changing a system that allowed discrimination to flourish unchecked. That afternoon, Maya received an unexpected visitor at her office. Jamie, the young flight attendant from Flight 237, arrived with a nervous smile and a folder tucked under her arm. "I hope it's okay that I stopped by," she said. "I wanted to tell you in person. I've applied to the FAA trainee program, specifically the regulatory analyst track." Maya smiled warmly. "That's wonderful news, Jamie. The agency needs people with your courage and integrity." "I wouldn't have had the confidence without seeing you in action," Jamie admitted. "You showed me that one person really can make a difference." "I'd be happy to write you a recommendation," Maya offered. "That would be amazing," Jamie replied, then hesitated. "There's something else you should know." After everything went public, 6 more crew members came forward with stories about Clara and others. The airline tried to pressure us to stay quiet, but we formed a support group for airline staff dealing with discrimination issues. We're helping each other document problems and file proper reports. Maya nodded approvingly. That's exactly the kind of grassroots change the industry needs. After Jamie left, Maya turned her attention to another pressing matter. Transcontinental Airways had been required to completely restructure its training programs and complaint systems under FAA supervision. Today was the deadline for their first quarterly compliance report. The document that arrived in Maya's inbox showed promising signs. The airline had overhauled its hiring practices, implemented anonymous complaint channels that bypassed direct supervisors, and instituted a 3 strikes policy for discriminatory behavior. Most significantly, they had hired an independent civil rights attorney to review every discrimination complaint filed in the past 5 years, resulting in apologies and compensation to dozens of passengers who had previously been dismissed. Maya's phone rang, Director Wilson checking in on the report. "They're actually taking this seriously," she told him after summarizing the findings. "The external pressure hasn't let up. Their corporate clients made it clear that continued business relationships depended on meaningful reforms." "Nothing motivates an airline like the threat of losing those premium corporate accounts," Wilson observed. "By the way, have you seen their new commercial?" Maya hadn't, so she pulled it up on her computer after the call. The airline's new advertisement was a complete departure from their previous marketing, which had focused almost exclusively on white business travelers enjoying premium amenities. The new spot featured a diverse range of passengers being served with equal attention and respect in all cabin classes. While Maya wasn't mentioned by name, the airline carefully avoided any direct reference to the incident that had forced this change. Her impact was evident in every frame of the reimagined service standards. Later that week, Maya was passing through Oakland International Airport on her way to inspect a regional carrier when she spotted a familiar face. Clara Monroe was working at a small souvenir shop near the food court, arranging keychains on a display rack. She looked different, her once perfect hair pulled back in a simple ponytail, her designer clothes replaced by a retail uniform. Their eyes met briefly across the terminal. For a moment, Maya thought Clara might approach her or make a scene. Instead, the former flight attendant simply looked down, the fight gone from her expression. Maya continued walking, offering a small, respectful nod as she passed. She took no pleasure in Clara's downfall. It had never been about personal vengeance. The real victory was in the industry-wide changes that were slowly taking root. That evening, Maya found a handwritten letter in her mailbox, a rarity in the digital age. The return address showed it was from Captain Lee, the pilot from Flight 237. Inside was a single page in careful handwriting. "Inspector Roberts, I've thought often about our flight together and my failure to intervene when I should have. Your courage reminded me of the kind of leadership I had forgotten. Since that day, I've established a mentoring program for pilots on recognizing and addressing discrimination in the cabin. 26 captains have joined so far. We're working to change the culture from the cockpit down. Thank you for showing us the way." Respectfully, Captain William Lee. Maya carefully folded the letter and placed it in a special drawer where she kept meaningful correspondence. Change was happening, one person at a time. 2 weeks later, Maya found herself on another cross-country flight, this time in economy class on a different airline. She had booked the seat deliberately, continuing her practice of flying different carriers and cabin classes to monitor industry-wide service standards. No one recognized her as she took her place in 23B. From this vantage point, she quietly observed the crew's interactions with passengers, noting the small details that revealed an airline's true culture. She watched as an elderly black man was helped with his bag, a young mother with twins was offered extra snacks, and a nervous first-time flyer was reassured by a patient flight attendant. The service wasn't perfect. The plane was full, the crew busy. But there was a fundamental respect in each interaction. No passenger was treated as if they didn't belong. Maya smiled to herself and closed her eyes, allowing herself to enjoy the flight simply as a passenger. Her official inspection would come later. For now, she was content knowing that her work was making a difference beyond one airline or one flight attendant. As the plane reached cruising altitude, Maya's thoughts returned to her mother. Vanessa Roberts had never lived to see her daughter become the changemaker she'd raised her to be, but her influence was present in everything Maya did. From the frightened 16-year-old who had watched her mother endure humiliation at 35,000 feet, Maya had become a force for transformation in an industry that had once seemed immovable. The journey had come full circle. The passenger had become the protector. 6 months after Flight 237, Maya was invited to speak at the National Aviation Service Conference in Dallas. As she waited backstage, she was approached by an unexpected visitor, Ellen Miller, the retired judge who had witnessed everything on that fateful flight. "I wasn't sure you'd remember me," Ellen said, extending her hand. "Of course I do," Maya replied warmly. "How is your husband doing?" "Much better, thank you," Ellen smiled. "His doctors say that quick response on the plane probably prevented a more serious episode." She hesitated, then added, "I just wanted you to know that we've flown 6 times since then, and we've noticed a difference. It's subtle, but it's there. Flight attendants seem more careful, more conscious of how they treat everyone." Maya nodded. "That's good to hear. Change takes time, but it's happening. Because of you," Ellen said firmly. "What you did that day mattered." After her speech received a standing ovation, Maya was approached by a representative from a civil rights organization who presented her with their annual Courage in Action Award. Though uncomfortable with personal recognition, Maya accepted it graciously, using her brief acceptance remarks to emphasize that systemic change required collective action, not just individual heroes. 1 year to the day after Flight 237, Maya found herself in Washington, D.C., testifying before a congressional transportation subcommittee. Legislation had been proposed to strengthen anti-discrimination protections for air travelers and increase penalties for non-compliance. "The incident that brought us here today was not unique," she told the assembled lawmakers. "What was unique was that it happened to someone positioned to do something about it. For every passenger who files a complaint, dozens suffer in silence, believing the system won't respond. We have an opportunity to change that perception and that reality." The bill passed with bipartisan support 3 weeks later, creating new accountability mechanisms that Maya and her team would help implement. In a quiet moment between flights and inspections, Maya sometimes reflected on how far things had come. The moldy meal and cold treatment she'd received on Flight 237 had catalyzed changes affecting millions of travelers. An industry that had often placed appearance and privilege above equal treatment was being forced to re-examine its fundamental values. On the anniversary of her mother's death, Maya visited the grave with fresh flowers and news to share. "The Aviation Engineering Scholarship in your name awarded its first grants today, Mom," she said softly. 3 young women who might follow in your footsteps. And the new regulations we pushed for, the ones preventing airlines from burying discrimination complaints. They're officially being called the Roberts Rules internally at the FAA. She placed her hand on the cool stone, feeling a connection that transcended time and loss. "You always said the sky should belong to everyone. We're making that a little more true every day. As Maya left the cemetery, her phone chimed with a notification about her next assignment, an undercover inspection of a major international carrier. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, new opportunities to make a difference. The work continued, but today, in this moment, she allowed herself to feel the full weight of what had been accomplished. From a single flight, a routine trip from New York to San Francisco, had come changes that rippled across an entire industry. From one woman's courage had come protection for countless travelers who would never know her name. Maya boarded her evening flight home, taking her seat in economy class. As the plane taxied for takeoff, she watched the flight attendants prepare the cabin with professional efficiency and equal attention to all passengers. She smiled and whispered to herself, "They're learning." Have you ever witnessed injustice and wondered if one person could truly make a difference? Maya's journey shows us they can. If this story moved you, please like, subscribe, and share to help us continue bringing powerful narratives of courage and change to your screen every week.